Good morning, Winchester Public Library. How's everybody doing this morning? Happy Monday. The bells are ringing. It's 10 o'clock, right on time. The last Monday in July. Hard to believe. Hello, Clipco Landscaping. I'm going to have another short chat with you guys today, not too long. I would really like to hear if there's anything that you want me to talk about on our All Booked live stream. Today's topic, I sort of decided at the last minute, spending another very hot weekend not leaving my house, dreaming about going somewhere. I was thinking it might be fun to talk about travel memoirs because a lot of people's travel got canceled this summer and travel was changed. Maybe you're hopping in the car and taking a road trip after taking a COVID test or something like that, or your, kids' camps got canceled, or your trip to Paris got canceled. But there's no reason that we can't use our imaginations and take a trip with a great writer. So I selected just a few travel memoirs that I thought I'd just mention to you in case you haven't read the genre before. A lot like the food memoirs that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. These are writers who are just documenting their experience traveling over a period of time or to a specific place, revisiting their youth perhaps, or going on an adventure with their family. And it can be nice to just kind of fall away into a book like this to escape for a little while. And here are some for you to enjoy. I just have a few to show you. And then I'll get to looking at our calendar for the week, which I'll open up right now so I have it all ready for you. All right, so the first book I have for you is called A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. Bill Bryson is a journalist and a writer. He's written many nonfiction books. His most recent book is called The Body, Guide for Inhabitants, I think is the subtitle. He's a great writer. He's very engaging and tells a funny story and does a lot of research, but balances his writing with sort of anecdotal narrative. And this is a story about a hiking trip that he took on the Appalachian Trail, which goes from Georgia to Maine. And he did the whole thing. And he documents his experiences. He goes into some local history. He goes into some history of the trail, some ecological history, environmental stuff. And then he tells some funny anecdotes of the people that he meets along the way, which is the part of a story that I always find really rich when we get to hear about interactions with kind of random people that you meet, because you think about that in your own life, oftentimes, especially now, it's those little interactions we have with people that really help us get through the day. So that's A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. And he does encounter a couple of bears along the way as well. So it's a fun one. Another travel memoir that I chose to talk about is not necessarily a travel memoir, but there are a couple in here that are sort of like on the line of travel memoirs. But this is called In Other Words by Jhumpa Lahiri. Jhumpa Lahiri is a beautiful writer. She wrote two books that I love, The Lowland and The Namesake. She's an Indian American writer. She came to the States when she was young and grew up, I want to say, in Rhode Island. And after she graduated from university, she went to Italy, to Florence, and studied Italian for quite some time and became very fluent in Italian. And in 2012, I think, she moved with her family to Italy for the sole purpose of, for the sole purpose of enhancing her ability to speak and write in Italian. She only read and spoke in Italian during the time that she was there. And she documented her process of this approach to learning the language in this book called In Other Words. The book is written in Italian and in English, and it's a page-by-page translation. So you open the book and you see the first page in Italian, and then you see the translation in English, which is really interesting. And if you speak Italian, you will probably really enjoy this. Translations can be really fun. And what's great about this book is Jhumpa Lahiri did not do the English translation for this book. There's an outside translator who did it. And this was her approach because she did not want to be caught up in how her words might sound in English, even though she was writing in Italian. She didn't want to jump ahead and think about, be sort of distracted by what the translation might be as it went back into English, because she was writing purely in Italian. She wasn't writing in English and translating it to Italian. This was the language that was coming out of her. So she asked an outside person to do the translation. And she talks about how her writing enhanced through this process, and how her command of English and her written English improved just through the practice of writing in a third language, in a different language. She spoke up speaking Bengali. She grew up speaking Bengali and English, so this is her third language. So that's a fun one. And if you've been to Italy, or maybe you were supposed to go to Italy this summer, like, this is the kind of thing that you could read, and it just would be kind of bittersweet because you're not there, but something fun to experience. All right, the next book I have for you is called Catfish and Mandala. It's by Andrew Pham. He's an American Vietnamese. It's a two-wheeled voyage through the landscape and memoir of Vietnam. I have never heard of this book until today, and I think I'm going to check it out today because it sounds really interesting to me, and also very bittersweet. So Andrew Pham came to Vietnam with his parents. They were boat people. They came over he was born in the 70s, so, probably late 70s. His sister was a post-operative trans woman who committed suicide, and when she was older, and in the wake of her suicide, he felt a very big pull back to Vietnam. And he did this by getting on a two-wheeled bicycle and leaving California, where they were living. He rode up the coast of California. He ended up going to Japan. He rode through Japan. And then he ended up going back to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, he felt very much like an outsider. And he had felt very much like an outsider growing up in America as well. And in Vietnam, he was a Vietnamese foreigner, which he was very cast out by his own people of his own country, other than his family, who he did connect with in Vietnam. So it's a sort of a journey of cultural identity, and told through his travels on a bicycle, trying to find himself, his sense of self, his sense of family, and his sense of identity as an American and a Vietnamese man. It sounds really good, if not a little heartbreaking. All right, on to something maybe a little more joyful. Some of you might remember the book Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances Mays. It's a much older book. There was a movie about it. She and her husband went to, I don't know, did she have a husband? I think so. Maybe they got divorced. Anyway, they went to Tuscany on a vacation and found a beautiful country home and moved there and never came back, essentially. And she is a travel writer. She's written many other books. She grew up in Georgia, and there's a book that she wrote called Under the Magnolia, which is a memoir about her growing up in Georgia. But this is a pure travel memoir. It's called A Year in the World. And what you'll find sometimes in a lot of travel memoirs is that people will write them over a period of time, like my year in Italy or my year in France, or over a period of time. Or you think of Elizabeth Gilbert's book Eat, Pray, Love, which is a memoir, but sort of a travel memoir of sorts, because she goes to Italy and Indonesia and India. So she's traveling throughout, and that takes place, I think, sort of like over the course of a year. But anyway, this is Frances Mays, A Year in the World. And this is a lighthearted journey through a lot of Europe and Northern Africa, where she talks about the people she meets, the food she eats, the hotels she stays in, how they want to have a really like a nice cultural experience, so they sort of avoid big 5-star hotels, and the funny things that happen when you try to stay at tiny little village hotels where maybe you don't speak the language, and just kind of can carry you on just a little journey with her through countries. Each chapter gets its own each chapter is divided by its country, and she has experiences, very local cultural experiences when she's in each country. She goes to Portugal, she listens to the music of Portugal, she goes to many countries. Anyway, the British Isles. So that's a fun one if you're just looking for, and you can read this one. I think this isn't like you have to read a front to back. If there's a particular place you're interested in, you could just read that chapter or pick it up and read here and there, read a chapter here and there. That's Frances May's A Year in the World. The next book that I had for you, which we don't have in the library, but it sounds so good, and I remember reading an article about this. It's by a guy named Dan Kois, K-O-I-S, or Kwa, but I think it's probably Kois. He is a writer for Slate magazine and for the New York Times, and there's a Slate podcast called Why Mom and Dad Are Fighting, and he's a co-host of that podcast. He and his wife lived with their 2 preteen daughters outside Washington, D.C., and they had a very suburban life where they felt very glommed on to their kids' schedules and fighting screen time with their children and trying to get them outside more. And he decided he was going to say, you know what, I'm taking my children and my family, I assume he decided this with his partner, not on his own, on a year-long adventure to try to just get out of this rut we're feeling like we're in, get out of this constant argument about screen time and getting to soccer 3 times a week, and just let's see if we can move away, as he said, to come closer together, because he really was feeling disconnected from his family. So they packed their bags and they moved to, over the course of a year, they went to New Zealand, they went to Costa Rica, they went to the Netherlands, they moved to rural Kansas and went to schools there, got to know the locals. He interviewed a lot of people about their lifestyle and how they have their family connections in other parts of the world, and he chronicled this for the reader. I wish we had it, but we have it somewhere in the library. It's not marked as out, so I'll take a look through some shelves, but that's another one that you could check out. That would be a lot of fun, especially now when we're feeling so much like our world is just so small. It could be a fun one to read with your family. Maybe read with some older kids and kind of think about, what would our life be like? Where would we go if we wanted to take an adventure, and what countries would we go to, and what would life look like there? What would we eat? What schools would we go to? That kind of thing. That's a fun one. Back to another one that is not a feel-good book. I've not read this one either, but I read about it this morning. This morning I read about it. I think I found it on the shelf actually when I went up. Hisham Matar is a writer who wrote this book called The Return: Fathers, Sons, and the Land in Between. He's Libyan. He grew up in Libya. He's been in the States for over 30 years. And this is a memoir of his journey home after Gaddafi was taken down, and he went back to try to find out what happened to his father. So when he was 12 years old, when Hisham Matar was 12 years old, his family went into political exile. And 8 years later, his father was kidnapped, and he's presumed to live in jail, but he doesn't know where his father is. And this is his journey to try to find him, and he goes back to his home. So again, it's not a travel memoir per se. It's not a memoir of him traveling around the world, but his journey back to Libya is a very big part of this book. And again, like Andrew Pham's memoir, going back as someone who hasn't been to their homeland for 30 years, feeling like an outsider, and going back with a very big job of trying to figure out what happened to his dad. So that's The Return by Hisham Matar. The last book that I have prepared for you is a book by Ernest Hemingway called The Movable Feast. And I don't think you can talk about travel memoir without mentioning this book, because it's a really good one. If you like Ernest Hemingway and all of the cultural icons that he has known in his life, all of whom are presented in this book. Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein, F. Scott, and Zelda Fitzgerald, on and on and on, James Joyce, on and on. He meets them all, and this is a story about his life in the 20s, living in Paris when he was a struggling journalist and trying to become a writer. He went there with his first wife, Hadley Richardson, about whom another great book was written called The Paris Wife by Paula McLean, and that is a historical fiction, but it's very spot on with many of the actual things that went on in their life and the timing of their life. She drew a lot from her research and then filled in the gaps in a fictional way. But A Movable Feast is a great one, and if you wanted to read A Paris Wife along with this, that would be fun. This book was published posthumously by Hemingway's fourth wife. The notes and documents on which this book was written, and I think many of Hemingway's documents are held in our John F. Kennedy Library here in Boston. When his fourth wife, Mary Hemingway, published this book, she was said to have adapted some of the details and obscured some things and moved some timing of things around. So there's a little bit of drama behind how the book was written. So that can be an interesting thing to read too if you want to read a little bit on the research of some of the books. So that's A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. It's a good one. It's a short, quick read. 3 other books I grabbed when I was upstairs this morning. I don't know anything about them, so I'm going to learn about them now, as you will too, hopefully. The first is called Alone Time: 4 Seasons, 4 Cities, and the Pleasures of Solitude by Stephanie Rosenblum. And this is a story of another woman who's feeling like life is hectic and she needs to get away from the buzz of the world to get some peace of mind. And she goes through 4 cities, Paris, Florence, Istanbul, and New York, which is interesting because you don't think any of those cities are where you'd really find solitude. But it's the solitude of being alone on the ground with the world buzzing around you, and it's how to find the pleasures of being alone around people, which I think we try to do a lot. So that's Alone Time. The next one I just grabbed because the title was cute. It's called The Amazing Story of the Man Who Cycled from India to Europe for Love, which just sounds like it could be quite adorable. PK is the man's name, and this is a true story. He grew up in a small, remote village in East India, and he fell in love and traveled 7,000 miles to be with the woman that he loved. He grew up poor. He had a very difficult life, and there's a picture of them, him on his bicycle in the back with the woman that he loves. So I guess it all turned out well for PK. And one more book that was right beside the spot where the Dan Coyce book about picking up and what's it called, leaving with your children, how to be a family. It's called, I don't think I gave you the title, How to Be a Family, about getting out of suburban life. This one's called 1 Year Off, Leaving It All Behind for a Around the World Journey with Our Children. Similar idea, different writer. Shortly after my 40th birthday, I began to experience vague twinges of spiritual uneasiness. And so he picked up his wife and children and they went around the world. Sort of like a midlife crisis, if you will, of picking up and leaving. Maybe it's easier. Maybe some people buy a car. Some people, who knows how people experience things, but picking up and moving and experiencing how others live, I think would be a great joy for a family, for a couple, for an individual, for a single person, to go travel the world, which is not easy to do now. And so I encourage you to, if you can't travel, come into the library. No, don't come into the library, but go onto our catalog, winpubliclib.org, and choose curbside pickup, contactless pickup for any of these books. And we will have them in the library and we will bring them to you and you can take them home and read them. And with that, I'm just going to check our calendar coming up for the coming week. I don't have it open here. Hold on 1 second. It's probably a great time to come in and grab your bag of books and go home and sit in front of a fan and read them, because it's very hot, and for people who don't have a place to go swim, like I don't, and some sprinkler time for sure, but a lot of sitting in front of a fan and reading is what we did this weekend. So our events coming up for this last week in July, which is just shocking. Today at 4 o'clock, there's a virtual teen drop-in. There's going to be some tie-dye tomorrow at 1 o'clock. There's a teen game night at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, which you can register for. Some tech sessions, recycled art night on Thursday at 7. Friday night dinner, 5:30 on Friday. And if we go into next week, I guess we can talk about next, doesn't even say next week, it says next month. Similar ideas, some teen drop-ins, itsy bitsy readers, don't forget about that on Wednesdays with the children's librarians, and some book talks and dinners again, and lots of art stuff. So check out our calendar at winpublib.org. Check out our catalog at winpublib.org. Don't forget to check out some travel memoir and anything else we've got going on here. Give us a call if you can't find books you want. We're here, we're at the desk. We can take your phone calls, email us. We're here to help. Have a great week, keep reading, and stay cool.